Awesome. And welcome to the latest episode of the Winter Garden Yoga podcast. I'm truly honored to have as our guest today, Andrea DuCane. I refer to her as the First Lady of Kettlebell. And Andrea, I don't want to talk too much or give too much away. So will you take 3 to 5 minutes and just tell the folks who you are, where you've been, where you're heading?
Absolutely. And thank you for having me on the show. And I love sharing the story and my passion for all things fitness and especially kettlebells.
Excellent.
So I'm just going to walk back a little bit from when I was first introduced to kettlebells myself.
Okay.
My story is actually being somewhat of a late bloomer, but getting into movement in my mid to late teens. Ballet, classical ballet. And I had very hard teachers, happened to be Russian, by the way. And from there, I went into jazz dance, and then later I went into martial arts, got very involved with my husband, John, and martial arts, Tai Chi. And at some point, I wasn't doing this professionally. I decided to take a course in Pilates. And I took the Stott mat and eventually the reformer advanced movements with them. And around that time is when we met Pavel and started producing some books and DVDs. When they came out with the first kettlebell, Russian kettlebell challenge, I was helping with all the video and film shoots. That was my background. So I, being kind of a movement kind of nut, I really loved the idea of them, but they didn't have any that were small enough for me at the time. I'm a fairly petite woman, mm-hmm. and coming from more of, again, that dance background, a little bit very mobile, but not super strong or very big. So 16 kilo was too much for me to be doing other things, swings. Mm-hmm. So we came out then with the after I got certified. Actually, I think we might have done the video before I was certified. We came out with From Russia with Tough Love. And that was, we got some 8 kilos or 18 pounds. And there's two of us on the video with Pavel, and we introduced it to women. I thought this is the coolest, most incredible tool. Being that women already have mobility, they could use strength. It encourages full body movements, cardiovascular, and it's quick. And what mother of 2 children who's working, wants to spend hours at the gym? You don't have the time. So anyway, that launched it. And I got very, very involved, obviously, in kettlebells from then on, because there were no other women, and I kind of created, encouraged the women that would come to the course. And it was very focused on men, mm-hmm. martial arts, military, law enforcement, and very few personal trainers, very few women in the first number of years. But we slowly kept branching out, and of course, many changes and years under the bridge, so to speak. And here we are. And our goal of, creating a kettlebell movement has come to fruition. And now you can find kettlebells in just about every Y and every gym.
You can't.
Not to say it's all good. There's a lot of people that were not properly trained, but it's a great tool. And I think it's a perfect tool for every population. Mm-hmm. Every dancers, older populations, sedentary youth, competitive athletes, people coming back from injuries. It's for everybody. It's fantastic.
So let's just take a couple steps back in case someone who's listening or watching has never heard of a kettlebell. Maybe they call it a cattle ball.
Yes.
It happens. Yes. So in 3 minutes or less, and I'll just play devil's advocate a little bit. You're like, what makes a kettlebell different than a dumbbell? What makes a kettlebell different than a barbell? Why is a kettlebell superior to resistance bands?
The kettlebell is a unique tool in that it its design allows for you to hold it in your hand, but the weight itself is offset. That offset load, meaning the actual body of the bell is on the opposite or outside of your body, not over your bone structure, allows you to be able to not only work the stabilizers during grinding exercises, meaning let's say you're doing a press. The moment you move the arm away from the body, it's loaded. You're loading all the stabilizers of the shoulder. Okay, so that's fantastic. That means even at the lockout, when normally if you had a dumbbell, which is balanced in your structure, at the lockout, you're pretty much not loaded anymore. But a kettlebell, you're always having to work because of the design. Now, that's number one. Number two, because it has a handle and because it can fit between your legs, you can swing it behind you. Therefore, you're encouraging the movement and the strength training of your posterior chain, which means your glutes, your hamstrings. So it's not just anterior of your quads, which you get a little bit more. For instance, a barbell, the barbell is always going to move up the front of the body. So yes, you can do ballistics with a barbell, but it's different. And the kettlebell, being that you get that posterior loading, is fantastic for athletes because that's a weak link, weak hamstrings, weak glutes. And also the idea of power production for many people is a struggling point. So you're getting the benefit of a functional tool, a pure strength training tool, and your cardiovascular piece of equipment all in one. So we call it a gym in your hand.
A gym in your hand, because it covers everything: cardio, strength. If I'm hearing you correctly, mobility, because you have to have certain mobility in order to swing the kettlebell behind you to bring it up to your chest and to press it overhead. Is that correct?
Yes.
Awesome.
And it's functional, again, because it's challenging your stabilizers of the whole body. And so, yes, there are a lot of things you can do with a dumbbell that you can do with a kettlebell, but there's things you can do with a kettlebell you can't do with a dumbbell or a barbell. And bands are, again, they're very great for especially working small muscle groups. They're great for kind of encouraging certain kind of movements, and they're lower of a load, obviously. So they have a place in most people's workout programs. But if you look at all the tools side by side, the most versatile is the kettlebell. And I also think the most approachable for all populations is the kettlebell. Band work is only going to take you so far. When I did my Pilates training, I think it's fantastic. And it's a great way for people that have imbalances, asymmetries, people that are coming back from some kind of an injury to get themselves kind of back together. And band work fits into that a bit as well, but it doesn't take you much beyond that. Barbells, it's more advanced. I mean, it's going to be more load. There's, especially in any of the ballistics, especially Olympic lifting, it's very, very technical and pretty advanced. So, that's going to cut out a lot of people. But a kettlebell, anybody can pick it up with proper instruction, and you can do your swings. You can do your carries. You can learn the get up and some simple pressing and squatting, and you have a full body, absolute exercise that's going to help every part of everything that you need to work on, whether it's pure strength or some kind of side to side asymmetry. For instance, let's say, you really have a weak leg. You injured your left leg like I did. I subluxated my left knee 4 times, and it took me a long time to rehab. I used the single leg kettlebell deadlift to help rehab it. I used a lot of exercises and principles that we teach in our RKC to rehab myself. And I train competitive athletes, and off season, they use kettlebells. They go back in the beginning of this next season. They're as strong or as fast as they were when they ended the previous season. So
that's incredible.
That's what's interesting. It works truly for all populations.
Now, may I ask, So let me preface this question a little bit from the perspective of a yoga teacher, because and maybe take a couple steps back too, because I deal with what we all do. Any fitness professional is going to deal with people who love to run, people who love to cycle, people who love to do their thing. So what I've learned over the decade or so that I've been coaching and helping folks, runners love to run. It's hard to get them to do anything other than run. Cyclists love to cycle. Yoga people love to do yoga. I've been trying, my message to anyone who will listen, yoga clients or yoga students, is like, yoga is a piece of the puzzle. You should do other things. If you do yoga, you should do kettlebells. Do you have a similar message for kettlebell people, or is kettlebells it? You're good to go only with kettlebells?
Well, I agree with you, and I think that you have to incorporate a healthy body. You're working with, I look at it as three kind of areas. You have to have your flexibility,
mm-hmm.
you have to have some mobility, and the two are not, they can sometimes be interchanged, but I like to distinguish the two, because mobility is the full range of movement of a joint and how all the joints work. Flexibility is actually how your muscles can stretch and move, and they should be also working within their entire range of movement. And then you need your strength training, and of course cardio is there. I think people often get enough cardio because they do go for a run, they go for a bike ride, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But so I believe that I encourage my kettlebell students to take yoga or to do yoga, or they have to add in some flexibility into their programming and their workout. All my personal training clients, they have their stretches that they have to do. Some things they do before they work out with kettlebells, and a lot of things they do after. Some things I want them to do daily. They should be, because you have to keep your body mobile.
Mm-hmm.
I run across the runners and the cyclists and the yoga people too, and it's very hard to get them out of what's their comfort zone. The problem is that you can't just live in one sport, unless your sport is, well, kettlebells is not really a sport. I mean, there is one, but it's more of a tool. So it's probably the most well-rounded of all the tools, if you will. But even there, you have to make sure you're getting your flexibility. I like to say, you go to a gym. Okay, on one corner is the weight room. All the big beefy guys are in there. They're lifting really heavy weights, probably with not great technique, but that's another story. It's heavier the better. And then you look over on the other side, and there is all the loosey-gooseys, I call them, that are super mobile, and they're in the yoga classes. And what I would like to do is switch them out.
Mm-hmm.
Take the big guys, put them in the yoga class. Take the loosey-gooseys and put them in the strength training world, because they're not balanced. And both of them will end up creating such asymmetries in the body that they'll get injured. The hypermobile gals, and I see them in my kettlebell courses, they risk a lot of joint pain and problems down the road, because the stretch reflex can get turned off. And if they're already mobile, they don't need to be stretching anymore.
Right.
They need to find integrity of the joint system by strengthening the muscles around the joints. The men that are really locked up, and they've probably done a lot of bad things to their shoulders, from poor bench pressing, too many push-ups with bad technique. And they have, messed up shoulders. They probably have very limited movement in their hips. And a lot of these big guys have no strength in their glutes. So I ask and encourage everybody that's listening, when next time you go out and you're watching some athletes, or you go to the gym, take a look at them. Their bodies don't lie. Okay. You need to have a strong glute muscle. I like to say a big butt, healthy back. You want a strong glute muscle. So if you see these guys that are all upper body and they have skinny little legs and no butt, that's a problem. Okay. You see the gals that are just super hypermobile, and no strength. And you could put your fist between their shoulder blades, their scapula,
Mm-hmm.
because there's no muscular development in their
Right.
back. That's not healthy. So our goal should be to be as well-rounded and physically fit as possible. And that means you have to have your strength training, you have to have your flexibility and your mobility, and get your cardio, because that's easy to get. Go for a bike ride, go for a run, or do kettlebells.
Gotcha.
So absolutely, the gals that do yoga, they need to do strength training. And the guys that are in the weight room need to do yoga.
Awesome. Can we address the term cardio for a minute and a half?
Sure.
Because
Yeah,
folks
absolutely.
throw cardio out a lot. They just say, well, cardio this, cardio that. What does cardio mean to you?
Well, there are different types, of course,
Mm-hmm.
because it's how you're operating your body. What most people think of as cardio is they think they're going to go for a run.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a lot of the way people run, little quotation marks, is more like they're just throwing their bodies forward or falling forward, and I can walk faster than they can run. Then you have your more power cardio or endurance athletes, which would be the sprinters. And then, of course, we have the HIIT, high intensity training, which is more interval training.
Mm-hmm.
And so you push really, really hard till you're uncomfortable. You rest a little bit, push hard, and rest a little bit. So those are different types of training. There have been studies, and I don't have them right in front of me, but there have been plenty of studies about endurance training doesn't make a strong heart necessarily. Oftentimes what it's doing is it's enlarging the heart, but it doesn't make the blood pumping through the heart any more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
They have found that sprinters and those power athletes and people that do more interval training have a strong heart, dense heart muscle that can pump a lot of blood through. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what we want. Very interesting. I've been doing I do a lot of research on different populations, and oftentimes I find studies that have been just confirming, of course, what I've known on my own for many years. But for one of them is that when you have a senior population, if you have seniors, there's not a lot of benefit for them to do cardio.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm talking people probably closer to their 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And 80s, what benefits their bodies the most for adding years onto their life and having a functional and active life is strength training with mobility.
Very interesting.
And of course, within that, you're going to do some balance work. Okay. Without muscle, I'm sorry, but you don't have balance. And you also don't have that cushion of muscle. And if you fall, you break a hip and then you die.
Right.
Pretty much how it goes. So they don't need cardio at that point in their life because it's not going to do enough for them. Yes, you want to keep your body fat within a reasonable place, but you can actually do that by strength training because muscle is your furnace. Okay. It's your engine. Mm-hmm. And, coming from the dance world and muscle, any kind of tissue other than bone skin is bad.
Right.
Well, when you get older, that muscle is what's going to help you get through a serious illness. It's because the body can use it and it'll keep you healthier. It helps because you won't fall. You have the balance. You'll have the muscle strength not to fall. So you want to have your body fat comp in a good position. That doesn't mean you don't want to be super low body fat as you get older either. You just want to create dense muscle tissue. And as we know, after about the age of 30, and in each decade, especially in the 40s, your body just loses muscle, and it loses it fast. And so what happens if you lose and you do the yo-yo dieting is that every time you cut calories, your body will start to eat its muscle, and you'll put back on fat. And it's harder to get that muscle on. So creating muscle in our body will help us stay lean naturally. Mm-hmm. It helps us stay healthy. It'll help your heart. It'll help your balance so you don't fall. You'll be able to be active, play with your grandkids, get out there and move and do things. So cardio is very important, obviously, but I don't think it's as important as people think it is. And think of what kind of cardio you're doing. If you're going to go on a bike, in order to really get a workout, you better be doing hills, or you better be riding for about 50 miles in order to really create any benefit. So you go for a run and you're out there for an hour and you've been jogging away and you come back home within about 10 to 5 minutes, your heart rate and your metabolism's back at ground zero. Nothing is elevated. And so that's it. You only burn while you're doing it. When you do strength training, your heart rate, your metabolism goes up. As your body's recovering, your metabolism stays elevated for a number of hours after you did this lifting. Well, I don't know. I think that's pretty cool,
Yeah.
So personally, I like to look at it as I'm going to get my strength training, my mobility, my flexibility, so I move well. That makes me want to get out. I walk the dog for an hour. I get my 10,000 steps in because I'm active. If I want to go for a bike ride, I ride all over the city. And that's not my workout. The bike riding is just for fun.
Gotcha.
I go teach a tango class for an hour and I'm running around. Yeah, it's just for fun. So my kettlebells and everything else I do keeps me prepared to do the things I love to do.
Gotcha.
So if people thought of putting a little less time in their cardio, a little more time within their strength training and flexibility work, they're going to find themselves being in a really good place. And it's hard to get people to stop running,
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. To some degree, I get it. If you enjoy it, go out and do it. It's a friend of mine, Jane, during one of her seminars, she says, all exercise is good. If it gets you off the couch and gets you doing something, great.
I agree.
But you have to think about benefit and long-term stuff. Like what's the goal, right? Is it, if it is to be lean, if it is to be strong, you got to do the things that are going to get you lean and strong. Walking may or may not do that, right?
Right.
So that's where we've got to get into strength training and mobility. And it's funny, I was just having a conversation with my wife 3 days ago. I'm 50 years old, and I was just kind of thinking out loud, and I said, I'm 50 now. I just have to worry about keeping muscle on my frame, staying mobile, and staying pain-free. Like my life is super easy now. I don't have to worry about trying to set a record for a 10K or try to run the fastest 5K or try to lift a ton of weight. I just got to keep muscle on my frame, stay mobile and pain-free. Would you agree?
I certainly agree with that. I just taught an RKC last weekend, and there was a participant, I think she said she just was 40. And she said, she's also does some competitive softball playing, so she's pretty active. And she said, I just don't feel the need to show off or to push myself. I don't feel that need anymore. And I just like to go out and feel good so I can play on my team and do the things I love to do. And it takes a while for people to get there, I think, especially if you come from kind of a competitive place. If you were a competitive athlete in high school or college, or you're running a lot of races, that idea of having a goal is very, very positive for people. But when you get older, the truth of the matter is, and I like to say that I could spend more time doing my quote unquote correctives, which include mobility exercises, very specific stretching or specific kind of movements to keep my body healthy, than just working out or working out hard. And if I think of how I used to use kettlebells nearly 20 years ago when I started 18 years ago, it is different.
Mm-hmm.
I like to do a lot of things that create a lot of mobility through the body and movement. And I like to do a lot of single leg and single arm, single side things to keep my body healthy. Excuse me.
No problem. So that might create a great segue. We were talking about this before we started recording. We can say it's safe to say that you're over 40 years old.
Yeah.
So if your current over 40-year-old self could go back in time, speak to your 20-year-old self, assuming your 20-year-old self would listen, what would three things be that you would share with your 20-year-old self that you could continue training, keep muscle on your frame, and stay pain-free as you get older?
Well, I would be careful of some technique issues, which it took me a long time to figure out. Being mobile and flexible, I relied on that a little bit too much. And coming from a dance background, it's not the greatest thing for my lower back.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be more cautious and careful of that. I would have watched my breathing. And a lot of things I have heard or I gave lip service to, but I don't think I internalized it as much as I could have. You know, preparation of the spine and lower back, a little bit more intra-abdominal pressure, and I thought I had, but I was in hyperextended lower back position for a lot of lifting,
Mm-hmm.
which isn't great for the sacrum and the L4, L5. I would be more careful with my hands, my grip, because being again that hypermobile person, I did some things not understanding how to hold grip, even barbells back in the day that affected my hands, my wrists. So I'd be more careful there. What else? I mean, I was always on this path for good movement, and because of my background in both classical ballet and martial arts, I've always had this mindset of perfect form or perfect technique equals success.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm lucky because of that. But like I said, the small things, it's three small things of just being a little more mindful of breath and how it supports your body, and being more aware of pelvic position and lumbar position in some movements. Those are probably, and then hands would probably be the biggest things for me personally, just because of my background.
Okay. So can you break that down just a little bit? Like, so breathing, and it's funny because yoga guy, we've got in yoga, it's called pranayama. It's breath control. So we're really big on nasal breathing, diaphragmatic breathing. In yoga, it's called a root lock, but in Western science, it's called a Kegel.
Right.
It's where we get our intra-abdominal compression and our intra-abdominal support from. Is that the kind of stuff you're talking about?
Yes. With my Pilates background, there was a lot of that discussion. But I didn't do that till I was probably 40. So, in fact, I remember taking ballet classes when I was probably about 20. And in order to get the balance, I would hold my breath. Not good to hold your breath.
Right.
And then the other thing is, I think in ballet, you're always trying to hold the belly in. So you're a little bit more of a chest breather. And I wasn't
Right.
bad. And I did understand that breathing was good. But at 20, I was I was pretty small, and I was a late bloomer. I mean, I developed late. I was, I just didn't have a lot of strength because I had all this elasticity in my body.
Mm-hmm.
So it took me a long time to develop a certain kind of strength. So I would go back and take all these principles that I've learned through, some of the breath work, both from kettlebells. So we have a slightly different way of applying your style of breathing, very similar, but we apply it a little differently. And then again, the pelvic positioning, which also they teach a lot of that in Pilates as well. But I didn't have that back then so much. And I relied on hanging out my ligaments and joints
Right.
more than I should have. And
Right.
that's not good.
Okay. And that comes, the piggyback off of that is the pelvic tilting.
Mm-hmm.
So in our classes, we try to say, if you're not hinging, right? So at Winter Garden Yoga, we don't do a forward bend in a conventional way with like a lot of spinal flexion. We really, what it is essentially is like a deadlift prep position.
Interesting.
Rearward shift, keep your chest up. It's almost like you're getting ready to touch the bar. So we try to say, if you're not hinging, you should be crunching, which means posterior pelvic tilt. So when you're standing in a mountain pose, neutral pelvis or a posterior tilt to try to engage the glutes more, to hold your spine up more. Is that kind of what you're talking about when it comes to the different pelvic positions?
I think that, yes, the pelvis, but depending on what you're doing, right? So, for instance, if you're going to go, and the problem is that people don't have awareness of their pelvis and their hips. They think they're all one and they get locked up, so they aren't moving properly. But if you're going to go into a hinge, the interesting thing is your pelvis is actually anteriorly tipping to get into the position, correct?
Correct.
So that's good. So you want to actually initiate the anterior movement of the pelvis before the hips go into it and you get into the hinge.
Right.
If you don't, you end up in a low spinal flexion.
Correct.
Okay, so that's not good. When you're, and if you think that the average person spends a lot of time sitting, cycling, and running, and so they're always a little bit in flexions, in a slight forward position, it tightens up the hip flexors a lot, as we know. Hamstrings get weak and tight. So for a person to even just stand with good balance, you have to over cue them to, get into a posterior tip pelvic, which is actually, it should be neutral.
Right.
Quite honestly, in my opinion, I've rarely seen a person who actually has a posture of a posterior tip pelvis and just in a natural standing position. Rare, but that could happen. And that's not what we're want either. It's actually because when you tuck, if you initiate by trying to tuck the pelvis underneath you with your glutes engaged, and you keep the legs lifted, you're actually, that'll put the pelvis into pretty much neutral for most people. Okay. And that also engages the glutes and it also kind of releases the hip flexors in the front of the hips. When you're doing other types of movement, like let's say you're going to go pick up a barbell off the floor or something else heavy. And if you're hypermobile, like a lot of young women, we already walk around in an anteriorly tipped position, pelvic position, because of high heels, and they think it looks cute, sexy. Stick the butt out, stick the boobs out, and you're good to go, right? So they get down into pick up that bar, and the cueing, when I started in a lot of the stuff, because a lot of it was for men who oftentimes they're working a flexion for some reason. Men just, they don't have the same abdominal core. They're not sticking their butt out all the time. So they can go into flexion as they're going down to pick up the bar. So we would over cue that anterior to pelvic position at the bottom. So then we're relying on our joints kind of just to lock that in place. So that's where right before you're ready to pull, you have to, I think now, flattening my lumbar a little with my breath. So I'm all locked in position. Pelvic is in the right position. It's neutral spine, in a deep, to pick up the barbell. But right before I lift, I'm going to flatten my spine almost a little bit by my lower abdominals in the breath. So what I think happened, the understanding of the pelvis is going to change depending on what position you're in. And the type of person, what other things you do in life, right?
Correct.
So whereas we used to say, stick your butt out or arch your back a lot. Well, not everybody needs to do that too much.
Right.
Or we say, put your weight back on your heels, lift your toes. No, you want your toes planted. No matter, pretty much, if you're lifting anything heavy, you want them planted. So we'd over cue in the fitness world because of common problems we saw. So people internalize that. I still get people lifting their toes up. Well, that makes you unstable. Then if you go to swing or snatch a kettlebell, your toes are dancing all over the place. You're not stable. So just the awareness of the pelvis and the lumbar spine, along with breath, for each given movement is great. So when you're having your people in mountain pose,
Mm-hmm.
with that, their thought process is to tuck under the pelvis, but if their legs are pulled up, it's actually neutral.
Right.
Glutes are engaged to support the spine. Right.
Correct.
It's just how sometimes it's cued and how people internalize the cueing that you could get people to do something, you can overcompensate for it, but that's just the way it is. That's what our job is.
Well,
right?
correct. Yeah. That's what we're there to do, is to keep an eye on what's going on and run up to someone real quick and say more like this.
Right. Exactly.
Right. Because words are not perfect. Words are like the most imperfect form of communication. Just to validate what you said, because someone may interpret, you and I can say the same thing and people interpret it different ways.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you and I will hear things differently. You and I can be at the same seminar. We hear the same thing. Mm-hmm. I interpret it one way, you interpret it another.
Exactly.
So that's where the coaching comes in.
Right.
So we've got
coaching,
So we've got the breathing, which is
Mm-hmm.
awesome, because not a whole lot of people talk about that, which is great. We've got the pelvis, also great. Now tell me a little bit about hand conditioning or hand strength. Tell me about that.
Right. Well, the hands are super important, just like the feet, because especially if you're doing anything that requires you're moving or gripping, or and of course a lot of sports you're actually throwing things too. But if you're lifting things heavy, your grip, it has to be strong, right? And of course, lifting makes your grip strong.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to just make a point here about how important grip strength is in hands in general. Is that's one of the screens for seniors of frailty is their grip strength. Walking speed and grip strength are two ways that they can see how frail an older person is. So it tends to leave us as we get older.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of joints in the hands, which means that there's a lot of proprioception. That's great. But not talking about specific arthritis issues, which also will occur as you get older, but understanding where to place and hold weight will help you be stronger and help you stay safe. So for instance, when I misheard something, speaking of language, at some point I was doing some barbell work and I just let the bar kind of hang towards my thumb side. Well, there's the jump. That's not a very structurally sound part of the hand.
No.
And I sprained it or strained it. This is like years ago. And it still gives me problems. Jam your fingers, I did martial arts, so I did some jamming of fingers too. So you have issues with that. When I warm up my clients, or I do a lot of yoga-based things in my warm-ups, a lot of people can't do the hand position because their wrists are, now of course it's worse because of computer work.
Right.
But that's another big issue. So keeping your hands and wrists healthy is important. That means, moving the joints, circling your fingers and moving your wrists and, opening your fingers and squeezing. And kettlebell carries are great for developing strength, but I'll again, because I have joint issues in my thumb, I will work on it so I feel the muscles around it work better. So I try to protect the joints of the hand's integrity, but I also try to move them. So my wrist gives me trouble sometimes, but I'll just make little adjustments. And I still keep working them, because if you stop working them and you stop moving them a certain way, they'll stop moving that way, and then they lock up on you. So, but the grip itself, if you make a fist, you'll feel that irradiation up into your armpit. We're all wired, from the bottom of our feet to the top of our head to the tip of our fingers. So you make that squeeze with your fist, it goes right up in your armpit, and that'll strengthen all those muscles. So it's going to actually stabilize your shoulder. So grip it affects everything.
Right.
Feet are important too, of course, because that's where you get the grounding and the strength from. When they talk about balance work, they'll put a lot of people on BOSUs or uneven surfaces. And I think there's limited value in that. I mean, yes, it can be, especially if you had an ankle injury and working on all proprioception in different planes. But many people just need to feel stable and have balance on a stable surface.
Right.
Yeah.
Just walking, like just a gait sort of pattern, like a straight leg on the ground and then a bent knee on the opposite side.
Yeah. On a
That's
stable
plenty of
surface.
work. Yeah.
Most people, that's what they're going to be working.
Correct.
You know. So make them feel strong and stable so they can move their upper body on a real strong stance leg, give them the strength and the balance. The feet are, people think that they're like a separate part of the body, or they don't count until they hurt. Right. And then they go to the podiatrist and they have, you need arch support. So your feet your arches have fallen. Well, the fact is that there's muscles and tissue on the bottom of our feet. And, if you wore a knee brace for months, what would happen to the muscles around your knee?
Yeah, they'd atrophy.
Exactly. So the feet are the same thing. Mm-hmm. You have, and then of course the feet collapse, arch collapse, then you start to pronate, which means that your ankle tilts inward. That is creating impingement issues in the heel and the ankle, and that'll create pain and maybe to have alter your gait, and that creates hip problems on the same side or the opposite side.
It's all connected.
It's a can of worms. So strengthen your feet.
Yeah.
So I'll encourage people to train barefoot, and we do, at least in the beginning, with our kettlebell deadlifts, very thoughtfully done, where you're actually focusing on lifting the arches and straightening your ankles on your own. And you keep your toes down, so you're making all the bottom of your foot have to work. You're strengthening those muscles. Mm-hmm. And then walk a little bit and do the class barefoot. And then, wear shoes that have not maybe as much support, or allow your foot to move a little bit. If you need to put arch supports, wean yourself off and put them in flat shoes, not big, cushy, ridiculous shoes that, you're like 5 inches from the floor, and then wean yourself off them. So you have to strengthen your feet. It takes time, like working on your thoracic mobility. Sorry to say, maybe you're 50 years old or 60 years old and you've been in that position for how many years? Well, yeah, it's going to take you some time, but laying on a foam roller or through tennis balls and stretching out the pecs and doing arm bars and get-ups and, band work, you need to work it every day. We don't arrive at where we are with a snap of the fingers. Everything we've done from the time we're born cumulatively adds up to who we are and what we are today.
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
So if you want to counteract something, you have to work hard to undo and then rebuild. Correct.
And that's great. It's just great validation to hear this, because I understand my clients, my students, they get a little frustrated because they're trying, they show up, they put in the work, but things don't slow down, stop, or reverse themselves quick enough. Yeah. And I understand that. But, if you're 50 years old like me and you've had you broke your left ankle, and so you spent 40 years walking like this, and now you're hypertonic on one side and your pelvis is tilted. It takes a lot to unwind all that stuff and rebalance it. So I guess the hashtag would be every doggone day, right? You got to do this stuff every day. You have to, and by the way, and thank you for those bonus bullet points, because we've got breathing. So work on your breathing every day.
Every day.
Diaphragmatic breathing in and out through your nose. Work on pelvic stuff. Yeah. Whether it's through, now, is your Kettlebell Boomer DVD still available?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And we talk about pelvic position leading through the deadlift. It's it's basically cute. The whole everything is cute.
Absolutely. And so I definitely want to give a shout out to pretty much anything that has Andrea DuCane's name on it. check it out for sure. I did.
Thank you.
I took notes on Kettlebell Boomer. It's a very complete DVD. It's got modifications, it's got regressions, it's got progressions, warm up, cool down. Is Kettlebell Goddess still available?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Same thing.
Yeah. A
You,
lot of exercises, a lot
yeah.
to play with and to push yourself if you want.
For sure. And it's easy. It's like you put the DVD in. If you want to work upper body, press that button.
Mm-hmm.
Just follow along.
Work out. Oh yeah. There's some brutal stuff in there. Put myself through my own thing. It's like, oh my gosh.
But it's got the warm up. It's got the workout. It's got the cool down. So definitely check out Andrea's stuff. It's very complete, self-contained. And then you'll learn more about kind of like what we're talking about here, pelvic tilting and stuff. But you also mentioned grip strength. You talked about T-spine mobility. So, and foot health.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's all very fundamental, and it carries a lot of weight. Just to kind of piggyback off of what you're saying, we don't think about our feet until our feet hurt or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the feet, that's the foundation of everything. You're not going to walk, run, or lift weights or do too much if your feet are messed up. So
I have a client who has some weight on him, and he's working on that very hard to get it off. And he likes to walk, and he does kettlebells and some other things. We've been working a lot on, for instance, his feet. He 1 foot pronates, and so that when he walks a lot, it will sometimes act up. It'll swell up a little bit because it's that idea of that impingement. Mm-hmm. So I've been having him, and he has flexibility issues he needs to work on too. So I'll have him do a thorough upper and lower calf stretch. And then be focused, really, really focused on how he's placing his foot, so that his foot is in the perfect alignment before he stretches his calf. Correct. Because if he's in the wrong position, he's not stretching what he thinks he's stretching. So he's stretching that out. Then we can go up to the hamstring and stretch the hamstring now, because you might as well forget about doing a hamstring stretch until your calves, they're tight. Right. And then hip flexor. So now he's got his lower body. His feet we also do some foot mobility and flexibility work too, stretching the top and mobilizing the talococcygeal joint and the heel. So we're doing a lot of foot mobility work, and then we're getting the flexibility so the calves are more released, so his foot starts to function better. And then I'm having him focus on how he walks. So it's a heel. So your heel hits first, and then a slight movement to the outer side of the foot. And then it waves through, and you finish off the big toe. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that people walk with flat feet, but you need to be waving through. You need to be pushing off that big toe, because that's what's, when you push off that big toe, you're actually going to help fire up the glute as you're rolling through. Right, because that's the extension, the extension of the hip, right. Yep. So you're getting into a nice hip extension. And then you have to have the front of the calf, so as you're coming through, has to lift up so you can, get the heel back down the ground. So actually focusing on how you're walking. And it's helped him a lot. He's noticing a difference. Excellent. But again, he has to do it all the time. He has to do it every day. Correct. That's the key. Yeah. And then he's going to feel better. And then he'll do more kettlebells. And then he'll do his deadlifts. And he'll do his swings. And then you start to feel better everywhere. Correct. It just goes slow, step by step by step. And you might even take 2 steps back and then step again and a step back, etc. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to share? Anything that comes to mind before we wrap this up, Andrea? Well, I would like to say I'm really happy that you are taking some of the principles of what we do in the RKC and HKC into your yoga classes. And like I said, I think that yoga and kettlebells are perfect for each other, because really kettlebells is almost like yoga with weights, the way we move with it. Right. The combination of the two will probably create the best balanced body that people can easily do. Yeah. So with a minimal amount of time and a ton of fun. So get your yoga in there and, get you some kettlebell work, and it could be simple, just swings awesome. And, some carries or goblet squats, go into your some yoga flows, come back. I mean, it's just fantastic. So they're lucky you got some lucky students.
Well, thank you. And I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but you mentioned like using kettlebells. It can be quick, easy. It doesn't have to be complicated, right? It's just like you said. I'm going to repeat what you said. It's just swings and carries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's not super sexy, but it's super effective. You don't really need to do 90 minutes of a whole bunch of stuff. You can do 20 minutes of really good technical stuff done really well, and you get a huge bang for your buck. Is that safe to say?
And if people are interested for their personal advancement, our HKCs, which is a one-day workshop certification, basically has all this information and tools. You learn how to do, and you're tested on a two-handed swing, but you learn all the swings. You learn our goblet squats, because how we teach you how to squat to the bottom, rock bottom safely, and using our core strength and our breath. And you learn the get up, which is a full body movement that is like yoga with weights. Definitely. I mean, you're moving, or Tai Chi with weights. You're moving all the different planes of angle, loading your upper body. So that is a great way to do. And it's simple programming, just, some 10 swings and maybe rack carry, overhead carry, farmer carry for 30 seconds, 30 seconds of swings, back to that, maybe some planking, and you have a full body workout, and you've worked your body functionally, as well as fat burning. So, I mean, you got it all right there.
It's true. I know, because I attended an HKC facilitated by Andrea. It was great. Where can folks reach you? What websites? Where can they find out more about HKC, RKC, and about you?
Well, my personal website is kettlebellfitness.com. And I've got like one HKC coming up in the spring, but there'll be other ones, and there are other ones around the country. So dragondoor.com will have other information about more products and other workshops that are coming up. So I have some articles on my website, and I'm actually going to be going to China. So we do some HKCs over there if you want to come.
Awesome.
And Chicago in October. And I do some classes and online training as well, but there's some information on there, some few articles and products. And then you can also go to Dragon Door and get more information about other workshops that are coming up in the next few months. So
excellent. And I'll include those links in the comments down below. So all the folks have to do is just click on the link, and they'll be able to find you and dragondoor.com.
Great. Well,
awesome.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It was great to see you again. Thanks for spending time with us.
Yeah.
And I hope you will go forth and be awesome.
Yeah. And you too.
Thank you.